Efforts to the Justice Department as required, lying to department officials who question him. He's also accused of laundering more than $30 million in income he received over a 9-year period for lobbying and his political party and his successor. So Paul Manafort, the president's former campaign trail head, he will now go to jail, Bill.
Important to keep in mind, too, here, what the president said about charges from 12 years ago. He's right about that. It goes back to actually 13 years now, 2005. But from the very first day when Kevin Downing, the original attorney for Paul Manafort, went before a judge and then came out on the sidewalk to greet reporters outside and make that declarative statement about the president's innocence on the Russia matter. Now, what Manafort's attorney argued from day one is that the scope of this current case far exceeds that by law for the special prosecutor, that being Bob Mueller. And Alan Dershowitz, a man we have gone to numerous occasions over the past many months to try and figure out the legal hurdles and hoops that we must understand here. That's Dershowitz's point also, that the investigation has exceeded the law that was set up on behalf of the special prosecutor. Maybe ultimately that argument wins. So far it has not, but that was from day one in front of that judge. That was the case that Manafort was making.
A little bit more about this coming into us as he has been ordered to jail, Paul Manafort. The decision was made by the U.S. District Judge Amy Berman Jackson. After new charges were brought forward. This, by the way, is the first Trump campaign official, to remind everybody, to be jailed as part of the Robert Mueller investigation. His attorneys, Paul Manafort's attorneys, have argued that Manafort did not do anything wrong and accused prosecutors of conjuring a, quote, sinister plot out of innocuous contacts with witnesses. And now Paul Manafort goes to jail. He will wait there until he sees these 2 trials that he has over the next couple of months. One as late as September. He's been on house arrest, facing several felony charges related to his Ukrainian political work and, Bill, money he funneled through offshore accounts, of course.
Yeah, this important also to remind us that the case that Bob Mueller is bringing against Manafort has shown up in 2 different courtrooms, one in Washington, D.C., another one in Northern Virginia. And there's a question as to whether or not the Mueller team was trying to find a favorable courtroom to, again, pursuing their case. At the moment, that's neither here nor there. If you're Paul Manafort, you're wondering about your own freedom. And if this ruling stands and we see Paul Manafort go into a courtroom that eventually leads to a jailhouse cell by the end of the day, the case against him has gone to a new level. How does that relate to the president? How does that relate to the White House? That's undetermined right now. But I would expect to see, Sandra, I would expect to see Paul Manafort's attorneys come public and come in front of a microphone to give us a sense about where they are in this case now and whether or not they made an appeal to this judge to keep him out of jail earlier today. But you are right to say it was about a month ago where there was an allegation that Paul Manafort was tampering with witnesses in the Ukraine to try and influence them or find out information from them as to what the prosecutors were looking for. So we'll get a little more of that again as this story unravels here from District Court in Washington, D.C.
A lot more coming up on that. Paul Manafort going to jail pending trial. That news just coming in. I'm sure that story will continue to develop. Meanwhile, Bill Hemmer, you're signing off from the U.S. Open out on Long Island.
It's been beautiful. It's not over yet. It's only day 2. And I could not get Curtis Strange on TV because of this breaking news.
Enjoy your
save
weekend.
It for another day.
And thanks for joining us for our first week
too.
in Studio J. Outnumbered starts now.
This is a Fox News alert. President Trump unloading on the heels of the newly released DOJ internal watchdog report, calling it a, quote, horror show and accusing the FBI of total bias. This is Outnumbered. I'm Kimberly Guilfoyle. And here today, co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend, Abby Huntsman, Republican strategist and senior fellow for the Independent Women's Voice, Lisa Booth, Democratic strategist and Fox News contributor, Jessica Tarlov. And joining us on the couch, Fox News politics editor and the editor of Halftime Report, Chris Stilwell. And he is Outnumbered. Chris,
Busy man.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday. Thank you for having me.
And there's nothing to talk about.
Yeah, another slow news day.
I know. It's a news alert off the top. We're so happy to have you here. You're a busy man. And
great to be
love
here.
the podcast, of course, with my co-host, Dana Perino. It is fantastic.
I'm carrying her. She's only okay.
I really feel for her.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, finally the truth is out. The truth is out. Indeed. And ladies, great to see all of you. And Abby, of course, will be on the 5 together.
I get a double dose of Kimberly.
Absolutely. All right, we'll double time it up. And President Trump lashing out after DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz finds former FBI Director James Comey's actions in the Hillary Clinton email probe were, quote, extraordinary and insubordinate. The president slamming Comey just this morning.
What he did was criminal. What he did was a terrible thing to the people. What he did was so bad in terms of our Constitution, in terms of the well-being of our country. What he did was horrible. Should he be locked up? Let somebody make a determination. Look at all the dishonest things that crooked Hillary did. Look at what's gone on.
The commander-in-chief also criticized the report's conclusion that bias within the FBI ultimately did not impact the Bureau's investigations.
Well, the end result was wrong. I mean, there was total bias. I mean, when you look at Peter Strzok and what he said about me, when you look at Comey, all his moves. So I guess, you know, it's interesting. It was a pretty good report. And then I say that the IG blew it at the very end with that statement, because when you read the report, it was almost like Comey. He goes point after point about how guilty Hillary is. And then he said, but we're not going to do anything about it. The report, the IG report, was a horror show. I thought that one sentence of conclusion was ridiculous.
Kevin Cork is live at the White House with the very latest. Kevin?
Kimberly, good to be with you on Outnumbered. An extraordinary morning here at the White House as the president answers questions for the better part of an hour. If you want to add up the time that he spent with our colleague Steve Doocy over on Fox and Friends, and then that unprompted gaggle, if you will, right out here behind me on the driveway this morning. Really quite extraordinary. The president having that wide-ranging conversation with members of the press corps and others who are here frequently. North Korea, immigration, the economy, China, and of course the recently released IG report among the topics discussed. Now on that report, which, as you pointed out, found misconduct and instances of bias, though not widespread bias, within the Bureau. The president seemed to take particular interest in its assessment of the former director of the FBI, Jim Comey. The IG said he was insubordinate and violated Bureau rules during the Clinton email probe. Now, asked whether he thought Comey should be imprisoned for his conduct, as you saw there a moment ago, the president demurred just a bit. But he did say he should be criticized roundly.
I think that James Comey was unfair to the people of this country. I think what he did was a disgrace. I think he goes down as the worst FBI director in history by far. There's nobody close. And I think I did the country a tremendous favor by firing him.
Tough words there by the president once again on Jim Comey. This is interesting for me, too, because, Kimberly, usually if we're talking about $50 billion in new tariffs on China, that is the story of the day. Not so much after the president talks for about an hour. Very interesting conversations indeed. Back to you.
It's quite extraordinary. A little bit of a stroll out there on the White House lawn. Never a dull moment, right?
Indeed.
Fantastic.
Indeed.
Great to see you, Kevin. Thanks
Have
for
a
that
good
update.
weekend.
All right. So let's take it around the couch now. So, you know, really interesting news today. You see the president come out, address these matters directly on the heels of that report being, released, and saying that he felt that it, wasn't fair and accurate in terms of how they described what he saw as misconduct at the highest levels, and really putting the blame squarely with James Comey.
Well, absolutely. And also, I don't know if anyone was able to watch that press conference this morning, but that was quite outstanding. Yeah. I was watching it in real time.
Even all the other networks were watching it, as he pointed out.
But I think one important thing to pick up, and Jonathan Turley was saying this last night on Martha's show, is that Horowitz wasn't saying that there wasn't bias. All he is saying is that there wasn't evidence of conclusion of any bias that was outcome determinative. Basically, someone saying, I'm making this action in a text message because I want to help Hillary Clinton. That was something that Horowitz couldn't find. There's evidence of bias throughout this report. Christopher Wray wouldn't be instructing the FBI to have basically training on bias if he wasn't worried about the way that this report outlined the behavior of FBI agents. All you have to do is look at Peter Strzok talking about, we'll stop President Trump, and other agents saying that Trump supporters are lazy POSs. Another FBI agent saying that basically they're worried about President Trump stopping the past 8 years of President Obama. You have another DOJ employee trying to get a job for his son on the Hillary Clinton campaign. So you cannot look at this report in its entirety and not find bias. So that is a blatant lie from Democrats out there and trying to make that talking point. It's just not the case.
Yeah, well, I think to your point, the media bias wasn't in James Comey's decision making. That's what Michael Horowitz said they found in the report. I don't think anyone can argue against the fact that there was total bias when it comes to some of those top FBI agents in the early days handling this Russia probe investigation. It wasn't just Peter Strzok. It wasn't just Lisa Page. I mean, I'm looking here at page, 412 in this over 500-page IG report.
Yeah, right? A very impressive stack of papers.
I haven't read all of it. I do admit
it's
that.
not long enough. You know?
But Chris, you read some of the text message exchanges between these FBI agents, and they say horrible things, not just about the president, but about President Trump's supporters. So it gives you a clear sense. You listened to Trey Gowdy last night on the special report, and he said what you can say is moving forward, it was tainted, the early days of this Russian investigation. The question is, Chris, where does it go now? Because Rudy Giuliani is saying we're not going to cooperate moving forward. We're not going to sit down and talk to Mueller because exactly what we're seeing in this report.
Well, they're going to try it. They are definitely going to try to use this as the means by which to not participate. They're going to try to use this as their excuse to not do it. You know, the president's former campaign chairman is going to jail today because the judge found that he tampered with witnesses, that he was breaking the rules. We have a lot of rule breaking going on in Washington. We have a lot of people who are not respecting the process, not respecting the rule of law. We have a lot of people who are doing the wrong things. In this case, you have a circumstance where James Comey, McCabe, his deputy, or McCabe, his counterpart, you have these two FBI agents. You have others who are saying, well, we have to circumvent the system.
Right.
We have to draw outside the lines here because we need to rise to this occasion. Comey's hubris, the arrogance of James Comey in saying, well, I am going to be in the tank this way, or I'm going to change this way, or do that because I know better. The problem we have now is people are not respecting the system, not respecting the rule of law.
All right, real quick, Jessica.
Oh, I just wanted to say that there are two types of bias that we're talking about here. So the political bias in Jim Comey's decision to, reopen the Hillary investigation, which everyone agrees hurt her dramatically and may have cost her the election, versus the bias in those text messages that we saw. So I just wanted to lay it out that it found both didn't count for anything in terms of decision making, but they're separate.
Setting up the server hurt her as well.
Yeah,
hey,
of course.
but it ultimately it led to us finding all this.
And this is a Fox News alert. A judge sending former Trump campaign manager to jail to await trial after prosecutors charged him with witness tampering. The president saying on Manafort earlier today.
Like Manafort has nothing to do with our campaign. But I feel I feel a little badly about it. They went back 12 years to get things that he did 12 years ago. Paul Manafort worked for me for a very short period of time. He worked for Ronald Reagan. He worked for Bob Dole. He worked for John McCain, or his firm did. He worked for many other Republicans. He worked for me, for 49 days?
Doug McElway is outside the U.S. District Court in Washington. Doug with the latest.
Hi, Kimberly. What we're looking at here is sort of a slow motion evolution of the irresistible force against the immovable object. We are looking at a massive collision, and it is happening before our very, very eyes. First of all, it is highly unusual, as you well know, in a white-collar crime case for somebody to be sent to jail in advance of his trial. Very rarely does that happen among white-collar criminals, but that's what happened here this morning. Paul Manafort taken into detention in advance of his trial date here in Washington, which will be happening in mid-September. He faces another trial in the Eastern District Court of Virginia just across the river in mid-August. It means that he is going to have to report to that trial while he is in detention here in the District of Columbia. It is an indication of the absolute determination of Robert Mueller to put some more scalps on his wall here, and he is seeking one out in Mr. Manafort. You've heard from President Trump and how he has been emboldened by the IG report yesterday, and while that's very, very separate from Mr. Mueller's investigation here, there is a lot of crossover, and a lot of that crossover is manifested in the person of Peter Strzok. who, as you will recall, was the lead investigator in the Mueller staff for the first 3 months as that investigation was forming, as the seminal elements of that investigation were being put into place. Peter Strzok was at the very centerpiece of all of that before they uncovered his text messages and sent him on his way, although he's still employed by the FBI in the HR department, which has a lot to do with ethics, as we are well known of. Not exactly a clear practitioner of the policy of ethics at the FBI. In addition to that, it's important to note, when we're looking at this mammoth collision which is underway right now, what Rudy Giuliani recently said. There has been a shift in the Trump defense, away from defense to offense. You saw that with the president's emboldened statement this morning. He is trying to shape this investigation in whatever way he can by going after Robert Mueller. I'm reminded of a statement that a Boston lawyer by the name of Harvey Silverglate said about Mr. Mueller. He is a defense attorney and a law professor in Boston, runs a website, or was instrumental in creating the website FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Education. He had meetings many, many years ago with Mr. Mueller in regards to a defendant that he was representing. And he was struck by something that Mr. Mueller said at that time. It was, as he was gathered with his associates among the FBI, that any criticism of the FBI is a non-starter. That is a quote from Harvey Silverglate pertaining to Mr. Mueller. Any criticism of the FBI is a non-starter. In Mr. Silverglate's mindset, it's a statement as to the insular nature of the upper echelons of the FBI. Mr. Trump is trying to penetrate that line of thinking right now, and he's going to be going after Mr. Mueller in a big way, especially emboldened by this IG report which came out yesterday. But as it now stands, Mr. I've forgotten his name now, the man who was just sentenced to jail is going to be in jail as of now, beginning today. He's not coming out of this courtroom, and there is a gag order in effect right now, so his attorney won't be speaking either. But he's in jail, and he won't be coming out until his trial.
All right, excellent. Doug, thank you so much. So, Doug making the point that this is, Chris, pretty much, unprecedented. It's at least highly unusual that someone would have their bail revoked, $10 million bond, this additional allegation of witness tampering, which could be quite problematic for Paul Manafort. Obviously, the judge already believing that there is some indicia, some credibility in terms of evidence proffered to suggest that, in fact, he might have done that. Yeah. And therefore, in an abundance of caution, a bail took place here. He's going to have to stay in there, absent some other extenuating circumstance, until this goes to trial. And he has a separate legal matter as well in the Eastern District. And
it's just as rotten. The conduct is just as rotten as you can imagine. To have a federal judge, because as you know, to put a white-collar defendant into jail prior to no violent crime having occurred, that he is not considered a bodily danger to others, putting somebody like that in jail is not unprecedented, but it is like a whoa Nelly. And the whoa Nelly here is you got a guy who is, the judge found reason to believe that this is a guy who's tampering with witnesses in his own case. This is sleaze, this is corruption, this is the worst kind of stuff. And everybody knew Paul Manafort was a guy who played on the edges. When Donald Trump hired Paul Manafort to be his campaign chairman, when he brought him on board, everybody knew Paul Manafort's record for working with unsavory people overseas and doing bad stuff. And here we see the fullest fruit of that bad reputation.
Isn't this, Lisa, just a day where it's a sad day for America, because, of course, that IG report gives us a better sense of what was going on with some people within the FBI. But then you see what's going on with Paul Manafort and just the corruption that existed there. I think, if anything, the bigger picture here with everything going on, because there are so many breaking stories today, is how do we learn from this? How do we move forward? How do we better ourselves? How do we better the country?
Well, and how do we bring credibility back to various institutions? And I think that was the big takeaway from at least the IG report. Obviously, Manafort, good lesson, don't violate the terms of your bail. bad. But regarding the FBI, that was one of the big takeaways from the IG report, is how it damaged the credibility of the FBI. I mean, Christopher Wray felt the need to go out to address the American people, to try to bring credibility back to that institution. And Doug had talked about an emboldened President Trump. I think we are going to see a ramped up fight from Trump and his attorneys based off of this report. Looking, how can Comey be a credible witness or have any credibility based off this report? And it wasn't just text messages showing bias. The IG, I forgot to mention this, but the IG also talked about it wasn't just the biased state of mind with Peter Strzok, but implied a willingness to take official action to impact the election. And that is damning, and that's going to be used by both Congress and President Trump moving forward.
Okay, Jessica, I had a quick reaction before we get to break.
It certainly will be used, and you've seen the attorneys emboldened. Giuliani said, Mueller should end. It should go to New York FBI, or the agents, I guess, who were actually suspected of leaking to him that the Clinton probe was going to be reopened. Exactly. So we all know why Rudy Giuliani would want that. I am no Peter Strzok, Lisa Page defender, but you also have text messages that show Peter Strzok saying that he didn't think the Russia thing was going to go anywhere. Remember when he's getting assigned there and he texted her saying, I mean, yeah, it would be great if it was, but I think this is a bit of a nothing burger. So bias, yes, inappropriate. That's fine. He was a John Kasich supporter when this all started, by the way. So I'm not saying it was inappropriate on your. I mean, I like John Kasich, but I'm a liberal. Anyway, I'm being wrapped.
You just proved the point. Sort of, says it. And of course, the president has pushed back on prior occasions and other interviews, saying that he, in fact, wasn't aware of Paul Manafort's background.
You could Google it.
You can Google it, but in terms of why didn't people tell him, he has made that case. All right, we're going to have much more on President Trump's reaction to the Justice Department IG report, including whether or not the bias in the Hillary Clinton investigation bled over into the Mueller probe and what it means going forward. Stay with us.
What they did during the election was a disgrace. It's probably never happened in our country before, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. What's going to happen when we go further? And there was total bias.
Reaction to how that DOJ internal watchdog report could impact special counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. President Trump's lawyer Rudy Giuliani sounding off this morning on Fox and Friends.
They should end it. I mean, the IG report basically tells you that both prongs of the Mueller investigation are either corrupt or answered. The preface to the Mueller investigation, like the next chapter, is the corrupt Mueller investigation. Not Mueller, but the reason for the investigation. Let's investigate the investigators. Let's take a halt to the Mueller investigation. Let's stop it. And let's turn it and get rid of all the agents doing the Mueller investigation. I mean, Mueller's got a guy with him that donated $36,000 to Hillary. He's got one who cried at Hillary's losing party. They're just as bad as Strzok.
And President Trump had this to say.
Look, you have 13 angry Democrats. There are 13, I call them 13 angry Democrats, and others worked for Obama for 8 years. I mean, you have no Republicans, you have no, it's a very unfair situation. But the IG report totally exonerates.
But Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer tweeting just yesterday, quote, I've now seen the Inspector General's report. It contains no evidence to make any reasonable person conclude that the Mueller investigation is anything other than independent, impartial, and just as important today as it was before this report was issued. Okay, Jessica, so the president obviously calling it out, feeling that it's very partisan, ideological in nature. He's referred to it as a witch hunt in other instances. And Rudy Giuliani, quite frankly, calling for it to be shut down, saying enough is enough.
Well, he's been doing that since President Trump hired him.
Yes.
And that's what he was hired for. Right. There were a bunch of lawyers who were there before who were not willing to go as far as Rudy Giuliani, and Giuliani is playing his part. But what the president is doing this morning is conflating the Mueller probe and the IG report, which are not related whatsoever. And we do have President Trump on tape with Lester Holt giving an interview where he admits that he fired Comey because of this whole Russia thing. That was totally within his rights to fire the FBI director, but it certainly gave cause to want to investigate into why he actually did this and what went on there. And so far, as we saw this morning with Paul Manafort marching in there to go to jail until his trial, that Mueller has very good reason to be suspicious that a number of people within the Trump campaign had inappropriate relationships with Russians, that there were financial crimes, and that there may very well have been obstruction of justice at the highest level. So the president is, again, trying to confuse people, or maybe he doesn't understand himself that the IG report and the Mueller probe are separate issues.
I do think, though,
Why?
that I do think that what came out of the IG report, though, gives Republicans the argument of, can we take this as credibly? Can we take this as seriously if the results come out and they aren't good for President Trump and the campaign in those early days because of what we have now read about those FBI agents in the early process of this? What I will say, though, is Mueller does not seem like the type of guy that's going to be pushed in a corner or that he's going to be impacted by what's going on. So I ask this to you, Chris. Do you think that Robert Mueller, obviously he's read this report, at least enough of it, gets a sense of what's going on. Will that impact at all his decision making or what he's doing now behind the scenes with the Mueller probe? So
Robert Mueller was a very good, by all accounts, FBI director. And was picked by two presidents of two different parties. He has a sterling track record, and he fired Strzok from his investigation. Yeah. He said, nope, if you have this out there, we can't deal with this. We got to be cleaner than Caesar's wife here.
Strzok still has a job, by the way, at the FBI, which is a whole nother conversation. He's still getting paid by taxpayer dollars. That is a true statement. Working in the HR department within the FBI. That is, I think,
he shouldn't be there. Quite frankly. Yeah.
So Mueller fired him from his investigation, and Mueller proceeds. What's really happening here is the president is trying to avoid having to talk to Mueller, and Rudy is trying to prevent the president from talking to Mueller. So they're going to put as much fire as they can down on Mueller now, because they figure if they can topple this thing this summer, and the president won't have to talk to him. Mueller's in line, though, because he can't really conclude the investigation if the president won't cooperate. And so Mueller's stuck there, and while they've got him pinned down, they're going to try to defame him, and they're going to try to totally smear him.
So he can't conclude until he talks directly to the president?
No way. He can't finish this until he talks to the president. No way.
Well, he can make a request, but the president is not under a legal obligation to speak to him. He can certainly request it, or he can provide questions for the president.
And he can make Mueller subpoena him and go through that part. And then he can say he won't comply with the subpoena. And then we go to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has to make a ruling. And this can be as very bad as we want it to be.
How can Comey be a witness in Mueller's investigation now that he has absolutely no credibility left? Also, Trey Gowdy pointed out in his statement concerns over the same investigators with Hillary Clinton investigating, treating her and her people entirely different than the way the Trump individuals have been treated. So those are two overlaps right there.
Well, all I see is they were investigating Trump and didn't say anything, but did about Hillary.
That was also a counterintelligence investigation, and Comey told him 3 times he wasn't under investigation. Hillary Clinton was the subject in a criminal investigation. Different things.
All right, and confusion on Capitol Hill after President Trump says he will not support the GOP's new immigration proposal. Where lawmakers go from here.
I need a bill that gives this country tremendous border security. I have to have that. We have to get rid of catch and release.
Does that mean the wall?
We have to have the wall. We don't have the wall. There's no bill.
Clarity from the White House as they consider a pair of new immigration bills. One is being touted as a compromise that would extend protections to Dreamers and includes $25 billion for the border wall. But leadership has now stopped counting votes for that proposal after President Trump appeared to suggest it would be dead on arrival. Listen.
I'm looking at both of them. I certainly wouldn't sign the more moderate one.
What does the bill have to have in it?
I need a bill that gives this country tremendous border security. I have to have that.
Well, meanwhile, Democrats are slamming the Republican bills while accusing President Trump of playing politics.
They will be doing a disservice to the nation by crafting a political dog and pony show that presents us with 2 appalling legislative options.
This is the first time in this era that we've had a president that has rejected newcomers to our country. So to see this president use this as a political tool, that's what this is about. And he's using these young children.
Well, fortunately, we have Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel, who is live on Capitol Hill to break this all down for us. Mike?
Lisa, good afternoon to you. It appears President Trump has killed or severely hampered the efforts of House Republicans to pass a compromise immigration reform package with his comments today. A key moderate on this issue says lawmakers thought they were giving the president exactly what he wanted.
We need to fix current law. Current law, with the court decision, has created an untenable situation at the border. We've got to make sure we're keeping families together and children with their parents.
Chief Deputy Whip Patrick McHenry of North Carolina says leadership is now not measuring support on immigration, waiting for clarification from the White House. McHenry telling Fox House Republicans are not going to take on immigration without the support and endorsement of the president. That's a pretty devastating blow to House Speaker Paul Ryan and his leadership team, which has been negotiating with moderate Republicans and conservatives trying to find a bill that could earn 218 yes votes. The compromise would create a special visa program that would give young immigrants a chance to become citizens based on education and employment.
We want to give members their ability to express their positions, and I do hope this passes. I think it's a very good bill. I think this is a very good compromise, and this can make law, and that's what we ought to be doing ultimately here.
Today, House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi could not resist taking this swipe.
The legislation has been described by our colleagues, and I touched upon, it's totally unworthy of America. It's a bad bill to begin with. And so when the president says he's not going to sign it, it just goes to show you how low his standards are.
Also today, the president blamed Democrats for illegal immigrant parents being separated from their children.
No, I hate it. I hate the children being taken away. The Democrats have to change their law. That's their law. They were forced. Quiet. That's the Democrats' law. We can change it.
Speaker Paul Ryan would not guarantee that the immigration compromise would pass the House next week. Now it may not even come up for a vote. Lisa?
Thank you, Mike. All right, so Chris, can you just really briefly summarize how the House got here and once again addressing the immigration issue with the discharge petition and sort of how they got to where they are today?
So the Freedom Caucus is 30 or so members of the House of Representatives. That's enough to, when the Republicans have a 23-seat majority in the House, that's enough to blockade any bill that comes through. So Ryan and company tried everything that they could think of to try to get the Freedom Caucus on board to vote for something on immigration. No, not unless it was a hardline bill that couldn't pass. The rest of the House couldn't get through the Senate, so they were stuck. So moderates grew frustrated because the Freedom Caucus holding everybody hostage all the time. The moderates said, what can we do about it? So they started circulating a petition to say, let's force a vote on a compromise bill. Let's get something out there. And in the House, which is a rather dictatorial place, there is one Democratic avenue, and that's if you can get a majority of members to sign on the line, you can force a bill out of committee onto the floor. They were about to do it, and Ryan said, don't. I'm begging you, don't. And I promise you, we will have legislation. We will have a vote this week or next week. It's going to happen. And then the president walks out today and in the process of feeding a bunch of stuff into the wood chipper says, oh, and also not that either. Now, I want to say this. I listened to it. I have no idea that he has any idea about which bill was being referenced there. I don't know that he was up to date on the Ryan bill. Right. I don't know if he was up to date on anything. I think he was just throwing stuff out there. So it may be that the White House does, in fact, this afternoon come back and say he was talking about the old bills that were out there and not these bills. Who knows?
Speaking generally,
Yeah, and it's clear that he wants to make sure that his base is happy, no matter how this ends. The problem that I think a lot of people are having with immigration, this is arguably the toughest thing we're trying to figure out as a country, that and healthcare, and it's an issue that divides this country more than almost anything else. It's now become an emotional one, and the Democrats are putting it on the Republicans. We all saw that exchange yesterday with Sarah Sanders. Many people thought that was horrifying. The moment the reporter said, you're a mother, you don't care about these children, you have no heart.
Personal
I thought that
attack.
was really inappropriate, really inappropriate. And we need to find a way to have this conversation without being, you don't have a heart, you don't care about the people that come into this country, because it is so much more than all of that.
But I think it's complex, and that's why Congress, for throughout different administrations, has not been able to address this issue. And it's not just Republicans either; it's Democrats. You had Henry Cuellar from Texas saying that he wouldn't vote for anything that has border funding in it. So, what do you make of the Democrats' position on this right now?
I think both sides have been lying for decades here about what they want to happen.
Preach it, sister.
Okay, I'll keep going. So, there are people from states, obviously, that rely heavily on illegal immigrant labor that are not going to want to pass something that's more hardline, is going to be kicking out people who make sure that their economies tick. There are people who have voted for things that they are ashamed of. There are people, Democrats on record, saying, yeah, we should have a wall, like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton and President Obama, and now that's not looking good. I think that Brian Schatz is actually offering a way forward here, the senator from Hawaii, who's saying it's really not hard to have like a one-line bill, which is just about these migrant kids. And maybe if we took it apart, because comprehensive immigration reform is one of these campaign pipe dreams, where everyone comes out there and they say, we're going to do it this time. And I don't think that you can. So fix the migrant kid situation, take DACA on individually, instead instead of putting it in as part and parcel of this. And maybe you can move somewhere and help everyone out at the midterms, because Americans are paying attention to how their representatives are voting on this.
Chris, if you don't mind, I just want to get Kimberly in this discussion.
Yeah,
as well.
obviously this has been a very intractable issue, and many, well-intentioned administrations have tried to do this. I mean, I think, this really is President Trump's GOP right now. He has the capital, the wherewithal, and the support in terms of his numbers, what he's put up with the economy, et cetera, and really has been a game changer. So he should use that political capital to put something forward that's his own idea for immigration or for DACA that would be, amenable to all sides, and then maybe he would be able to get some of those coalitions to come together in a successful way.
Right, I think that's 100% right.
Yeah. And unsurprisingly, there is a lot more to discuss. Democrats now reportedly calling on former President Obama to ride to the rescue and venting frustration at him for staying on the sidelines ahead of the high-stake midterms. Would his involvement help or hurt Democrats as they try to take back Congress? We're going to...
Democrats are reportedly pushing former President Obama to take a more active role ahead of the midterms. That according to The Hill, which reports that Democrats are frustrated that Mr. Obama has stayed on the sidelines. The Hill also citing Clinton fatigue, among other factors, for why Democrats see Mr. Obama as their only option. Quote, the desire among Democrats for Obama to take a more leading role in the midterm fight and party building in general is just getting stronger, particularly with the lack of alternatives. He's been way too quiet, said one Democratic bundler. There are a lot of people who think he's played too little a role or almost no role in endorsing or fundraising, and he's done expletive, in getting people to donate to the party. This comes amid reports this week that Mr. Obama has been meeting with key Democrats ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Okay, so a big call on the president here. Jessica, I'll begin with you. To get more involved, to be active. People are frustrated. You see Clinton fatigue. There's been gaffes recently, problems with statements that former President Clinton has made as it relates to the Me Too movement, Monica Lewinsky, and then Hillary Clinton seeming to not want to go away, still out there making statements.
I think that the next few months will tell a different story of President Obama's public role in all of this. He is doing a lot behind the scenes, not just meeting with those 9 hopefuls, but in terms of fundraising, in terms of ensuring, that his legacy, he has to build his library and do things that most presidents get to do for a little while. And he needed a break after what went on in the 2016 election. I understand the frustration, because I would say right now, Joe Biden and President Obama are probably the only Democrats that are unequivocally welcome at every single Democrat rally. Sure. Any candidate would want them there.
They don't want Bill Clinton?
No. I'm kidding. I would say no. Yeah,
I think Bill Clinton,
we were having some couch talk about that.
He needs to take a nice bow and walk off that stage, because I think he's doing only a disservice to the Democratic Party.
Obama will be out there more. He has a big fundraiser coming up for the DCCC, I think it is. So this frustration will hopefully be alleviated.
But you know what he could be helpful is when he sticks to the issues, whether or not you agree with what Barack Obama did as president. There are many people that disagree with a lot of those things. The Democrats are going to lose if they consistently go against Donald Trump and their hate for him. You win off of issues. Chris, you know this. People go to the polls based on those issues, not based off of hatred. So maybe that is where Barack Obama can be somewhat helpful.
Did you not watch the 2016 election? Were you not here? I remember you were here most of the time. Yeah. People vote over hate. Of course people vote over hate.
Hate, but also with the hope that whoever they're voting for can make a real change for them in certain issues.
I do love your heart. But American politics in 2018 is a open sewer. It's a rough place out there. This is not high-minded idealism.
You think Democrats will win if they stick to that hate for Donald Trump? You think that's a winning strategy for them? Because I don't agree with you on that.
Didn't work so far.
I think that, well, we don't know. I think that for Democrats, they need to key in on an issue. For Republicans,
that's the point I was making.
I know,
right?
I know.
That's the point
I was only lightly teasing you. The problem that Democrats have is they're starting to find it with health care. They're starting to come back around on it on health care. In 2010, the Republicans had an advantage. They took the indigenous hatred for Obama that was inside their party, the birtherism, all of the real wretched stuff that was down there simmering in the bottom of the pot. But then they were able to attack a specific policy. They went after Obamacare, which was so unpopular, and they said, we hate this and we're going to stop Obamacare. Democrats thought it would just be enough to be against Trump. They need to figure out a Trump policy that they're against, dig in on that, and push there.
But you also just made the point that it was Obama's issues that were rejected in the President Trump ran a campaign about eradicating basically the entire agenda of President Obama's. Also, the 2010-2014 midterm elections were about the issues. They were about the issues and the Obamacare. They're about things that happened under President Obama. So I don't necessarily know if it helps to sort of resurface some of those things during this upcoming midterm election. However, to Jessica's point, I do think President Obama could help the Democrats raise money. And I think people looking at Obama as more of a product of Democrats not having a leader right now and also searching for a direction.
All right, excellent. The president today also weighing in on the new NFL rule requiring players on the field to stand during the anthem. This is brand new Fox polls show what Americans think about the rule change, whether they are siding with the president or with the players.
When you're in a stadium and they broadcast that national, you got to stand and you got to be proud and you got to have your hand up and you.
Really no surprise there, I don't think, on the racial division. But what is not surprising there as well, Lisa, is that people just want to watch sports. They don't want politics to be part of watching football.
Well, you can't have anything nice anymore. Like everything's tainted by politics, whether it's awards shows or, the NFL. But I think what's really interesting, whether you like President Trump or not, he wins fights. I mean, you look at the NFL's approval rating. It is now at 42%. It used to be 64% in 2013. That is a substantial hit that the NFL has taken under this fight. You also look at CNN, President Trump calling them fake news. They launched a facts first campaign, which seemingly was in direct response to President Trump's line of attacks. You look at the fight in Congress over DACA in the Senate. President Trump won that over Democrats trying to shut the government down over DACA. The majority of Americans did not agree with that opinion. Republicans never win those kinds of fights. So whether you like him or not, he does win some.
But there's such a disconnect. Chris, I want to get your thoughts on this. A disconnect between what you hear from many members of the media today and celebrities who have millions and millions of followers. Many of them support Colin Kaepernick, support kneeling during the national anthem. You see that and you think the majority of the country must be on their side as well. That seems where the popularity is. And then you see these poll numbers and you say, what a disconnect between where much of this country actually is.
Well, it's all just enormously sad. It's as sad of a thing as I can think about that our anthem, that these moments have become a battleground and that are exploited by people on both sides for their own political benefit and to advantage themselves in these situations. This week was Flag Day. We had Flag Day this week, and it grew out of the son of a Civil War veteran who wanted to see the flag that his father had fought for honored. And it took 60 years to get Flag Day to become a real thing. Instead of being a uniting thing, it is now a divisive thing, and people are taking advantage of those old beliefs to drive people further apart, and it just really breaks my heart.
Yeah,
it's true, right?
A lot of people agree with that, Kimberly.
Yeah,
it's like,
do.
Why do we have to politicize patriotism?
Can you imagine that? And then there was such a shift of a variety of different viewpoints where people were saying they were kneeling for this cause or for that cause. And I mean, they have a job to do. They play for teams privately, so they should go there and show up. We're not taking a knee while we're sitting here doing this show. If they want to engage in, the First Amendment rights, certainly, and social activism and get involved in causes, then do so, actually in a very positive way, and put that forward. And you talk about the disconnect, and I think it's such an important point. When you look at the polling numbers in the NFL, it is a business that needs to be run and conducted accordingly and not in a disruptive manner. And I think they need to keep that in mind. And the president, he's the president of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and the brave men and women that serve. So, of course, he would want people to pay honor and respect to the flag like so many patriotic Americans
and Jessica, the president's made it very clear from the beginning where he stands on this.
He has, absolutely. But to Lisa's point about the president winning fights, he actually has lost this fight because his number one job is to bring Americans together. And this issue has, as Chris has pointed out, has divided them generally and certainly on racial lines. So that is a massive failure.
All right. We've got more Outnumbered.